Live on YouTube. On today's episode, we want to discuss some of the political things, some of the things that are happening in the Middle East as well, that a lot of us folks are not really sure of what will take place, what will happen. Now, if you've seen our previous shows, we've covered some of these things in detail, in full detail, describing where it comes from, why it was there, what is the root cause of the problem. We also will be talking about this on this show today. But we're going to specify it with much more detail with Dr. Bill Warner, who will join us shortly via Skype, and also Mr. David Agema. He will also join us via Skype in a little bit. We want to remind the audience that our phone lines will open in approximately 15 minutes. The phone number here is 248-416-1300. I'm certainly excited to be back after the new year. I hope you had a wonderful new year, and I hope you've made some excellent resolutions for the new year to make our lives better for the sake of Jesus Christ, of course. So with me via Skype is Dr. Bill Warner. Dr. Bill Warner, please give us some details about yourself, what you do. How can people see your material and reach you?
Well, I'm a scientist who, after the 9/11, decided that I wanted to use what I knew about science in order to make Islam easy to understand. I started my study, I'm a 79-year-old man, and I started my study of Islam when I was 30 years old. And there were three separate phases of doing that, but what's important is that I, before 9/11, had already reached my conclusions about the true nature of Islam. So when the second plane hit the second tower, I said, it is jihad, Islam is here. I didn't need to see anything else. So I've written about a dozen books, about to release another one, all about the doctrine of Islam, because as a scientist, I like to believe in the laws and principles. And so I wanted to know what the laws and principles of Islam were. So once you understand its basic principles, it's much easier to teach about it. And I run a website called politicalislam.com. This is what I do. I work 6.5 days a week.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for being with us. You are no strangers to the show. We've used you on the show before. We love your material as well. Thank you for being here. I remember last time we had you, it was something of your birthday. I don't know if it was your 70th birthday that you were celebrating at the time?
I'm sorry, could you say again?
Last time we had you on the show, it was your birthday, I believe. It was
really?
your 70th birthday, I think it was. And we're excited.
Well, I have a birthday about once a year, but I have 79 of them now.
Nice. I thought it was your 70th birthday. Well, thank you for being here with us. Now, let's talk about the turmoil that's happening in the Middle East. We see so much that's happening, especially with President Trump, with Soleimani, what's happening. And as we speak, the Democrats want to impeach President Trump. But let's talk about more specific things like the root cause of the problem that we have, all these Muslims that are always at war with each other. And always out to get the infidels. Where does this come from? So from my own studies and what I've been seeing, I'm sure you can agree, Dr. Bill, is that there will never ever be peace in the Middle East. Ever since Muhammad started and after he died, there was nothing but wars and turmoils. And even if you can recall the Ridda wars, the apostate wars, right after Muhammad died, many people, thank God that this happened so that they can leave Islam. And they did. Islam was shrinking. And here's Abu Bakr who took up the sword and went back and got them with the sword. Why is that? Why didn't you go back and try to get them with speech, with conversation, with some sort of, even if you tried manipulation? You turned to violence right away. Abu Bakr turned to violence right away. Muhammad himself was a very violent man. If somebody had threatened him early in his walk with God, supposedly, he was okay when he was a minority. And then when they turned to the majority, they started to take all over the place by the sword, converting Muslims by the sword. Now, I've got a question for you. We went into Afghanistan. When we went into Afghanistan, we tried to make it better, Dr. Bill, because America is always the right hand of God, supposedly, right? Trying to help that which we could the most. When we see tyranny, when we see oppression, we stick our noses in, to be honest. That's the way it is. But why are we still, to this day, losing the war in Afghanistan? And why will we never, ever succeed, in your opinion?
Well, Afghanistan is a great sadness in my heart because we wasted much blood and treasure. Here's the reason why we're losing in Afghanistan and why, until we change this basic fact, we will never win. One of the generals who was commanding in Afghanistan was General Stanley McChrystal, and he wrote a detailed strategic plan as to how to win in Afghanistan. Now, I read a copy of this that was heavily redacted. That is, people's names and cities and stuff were removed, but you could still get the gist of the article he wrote. There were 3 words that were not in that paper. Those 3 words were Islam, Jihad, and Muslim. Now then, if you're going to fight against an enemy, it seems obvious to me, and as a matter of fact, it was obvious 2,500 years ago to a man named Sun Tzu, you must know yourself and you must know your enemy. And if you don't know your enemy, then you're just shooting in the dark. You don't know what's going on. You don't know how your enemy thinks. Eddie, what breaks my heart about this is that how obvious can it be that you need to study your enemy's philosophy? During the Cold War, every member of the U.S. military was given a training course in the doctrine of communism. Why? Because the Army realized you need to know your enemy. But we've not done that with Islam. Instead, we pretend like it's just a religion, it has strange customs, and as long as we don't sit so they can see the bottom of our feet, then we won't offend them. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We're fighting against an enemy that has 1,400 years of doing what it does, and if we don't recognize that we're dealing with a professional enemy, professional in the sense of 1,400 years of war, then how can we possibly win? I don't see how we can ever win unless we decide to ask the question, who is our enemy, how do they think, and where does this information come from? Because it's all laid out, Eddie. You and I both know this, the tactics, the strategies, they're all laid out in Muhammad's life. He committed 95 acts of jihad in the last 9 years of his life. 95. Wow. That's about 1 every 6 weeks. That's how he was victorious. But he created a concept called civilizational war, in which every aspect of a civilization could be used as an element of war. I maintain that Muhammad was the greatest general who ever lived. That is, I praise him because he created a new form of war, civilizational war, and he made a war that was not a long war, but an eternal war, because the fighting is to go on until every person on the face of the earth submits to the Sharia.
That's right.
So that's just that's the reason what we don't know and why we can't win.
That's right. That's right. And also, where's this coming from, Dr. Bill? Now, in my studies, as I said earlier, I see that this is all coming from Muhammad himself, coming from the Quran itself.
Yes.
And then there are times when I'm talking with a Muslim. Here in the West, people don't understand that the political views and Islam go hand in hand. Islam is a political move. If I was to question a Muslim and say, political Islam, tell me the difference between that and your religion of Islam, they'll get all confused. There is no difference. Islam, in my opinion, is this so-called religion or disguised as a religion, but really it is a political move that is moving forward. And we see that from the Quran itself, because if it is a religious action, if it is a religious movement, you would involve a God. Not only would you involve a God, but this God had to show proof of himself, had to show proof by backing it up with miracles, as he did with all the previous prophets. We don't see that in Muhammad. We see that this God is a sock puppeteer of Muhammad's hand. That's all it is. That's all he's doing. And then we also see commands that Muhammad himself is giving out in the Quran that contradict the commands of this supposed Allah that he's following. But let me give you an example. In chapter 4, verse 89 of the Quran, this is what it says. They wish that they reject the faith as they have rejected the faith, and thus that you are all equal like one another. So take not friends, awliya, or protectors from them until they immigrate in the way of Allah. Well, what is the way of Allah? It's what Muhammad tells you to follow. But if they turn back from Islam, that is, then hold them and kill them wherever you find them, and do not take them as your friends or helpers or be amongst them at all. So if I change to this religion, And if I switched out of my religion, that is Islam right now, I switched out, guess what the Quran is commanding me to do? It's commanding me to kill you, Bill, for coming out of Islam, to murder you. Don't even take you as a friend. Don't even think of you as a friend. Chapter 4, verse 65. Say to those that have faith that are in full submission to Muhammad's teaching. This verse is talking about those that were Muslims in chapter 4, verse 65, chapter 4, verse 90 and 91, murder them and banish them into subjugation. Or read chapter 9 of the Quran, Dr. Bill. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. To go out and murder those who do not believe, simply for that sake. Not those that are coming against you in war, not those for self-protection, nothing of that nature, but for those that don't believe. That is the main and root cause of the problem. You can talk about Islam all day long. You can talk about the political and what we can do. But if the root cause of the problem is telling you kill anybody who doesn't believe in what you believe, and if they leave your faith, you kill them, I don't see that as a religion at all. As a matter of fact, religions are supposed to be peaceful. And we'll talk about that a little bit, but I find no peace at all in Islam. My second question to you, since we're talking about Islam and Afghanistan, when questioned by the CIA had captured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's a confident Al-Qaeda member. He's a mastermind behind what took place in 9/11. Here's what he said. We will win because Americans don't realize we do not need to defeat your military. We only need to fight along enough for you to defeat yourselves by quitting. I mean, what an amazing quote. Why do Muslims continue to fight eternally? It doesn't seem like it'll never stop.
It will never stop. As long as Islam is in existence, its root causes are that it must fight until it wins by defeating all others who are not Muslim. By the way, that verse you were talking about earlier about friends, I think one of the most heartbreaking things about the Quran is I've counted 13 different verses which say that a Muslim is never the friend of the kafir, the non-Muslim. Eddie, how tragic is that?
Yeah.
That a Muslim can't really be your friend, or what's even worse, let's say that he really is your friend. Then he's not a good Muslim. I mean, what sort of neighborhood does this create? What sort of country does this create when the man that you would like, if at work, he may be a professional engineer and kind and everything, but if you think in your mind, you know, he's not really my friend. It's like he's a member of some secret society which is out to get me. So I think these 13 verses, I just personally find them tragic, that it would divide humanity into those who can be your friends and can't be your friends. And why am I called a bigot when I talk about this? But when they say this in their books, they're considered to be the religion of peace. It just drives me crazy.
And what peace? I mean, Islam by itself does not mean peace, as many Muslims here in the West tell us that it means peace. It means to submit.
Yes.
It comes not from the word salam, which is peaceful, but istaslim or musallim, salim nafsak. Even when we say salim nafsak to a person, means give yourself up, which is what the police would say in the Middle East if they're chasing after somebody. That is the root cause of the word. The word itself means subjugation. The word itself means to submit. And submit to what? And to whom? To the last prophet. Who said, Muhammad, you were the last prophet? The Quran. Well, who said the Quran is sent by God himself? Muhammad. It's circular reasoning. Muhammad is pointing to the Quran.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the Quran
No matter
is
how
pointing.
you do it, it's Muhammad said.
Exactly.
By the way, let me give a quick summary of his life, because it really explains a lot. He preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca, converted about 150 people, but he was a nuisance in the neighborhood. The Meccans said, you create a division and hatred among us, so they made him leave. When he went to Medina, he became a politician and a jihadist, and after 95 acts of jihad, when he died 10 years later, he basically ruled all of the Arabian Peninsula. So there we see an important issue here, which is that you can talk about religion of peace because Muhammad did not kill anybody in Mecca. So you can say, well, see, Islam is a religion of peace, but the peace did not bring him success. War was what brought him success. Beheadings brought him success. Spies, counter spies, secret agents. These were all the things that he used in his war against the Kafir. And the Kafir is just someone who says, basically, I don't think that Muhammad is the prophet of Allah. And for that, I can be killed. And yet it's called the religion of peace. That's one of the great ironies of the 21st century.
Yeah, and it's, you know, when I take a look at a Muslim and I give him all these verses, sometimes I see a shocking look on their face. And I wonder, did they know this? Well, now that you know this, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to explain it away? And it's almost like they're just going on Google, searching for the answer. They find some sheikh or some imam giving a legitimate answer. And the legitimate answer is, well, we were doing this to protect ourselves from those Christians that were coming against us. What Christian was coming against you during that time? Nobody. You were going into Christian villages, Muhammad and his followers were. Oh, we were protecting ourselves from the Jews. No Jew was coming against you. It was you that is going into the town of the Jews, asking them to give up their weapons. And as soon as they did, Muhammad goes and tortures and kills and tortures the treasurer for the gold that he supposedly hid. And he tortures him to death. He takes his wife. He rapes the wife that same day. It was the first day of their marriage. The first day of their marriage. He takes the wife for himself. He rapes her. He takes her into marriage. And now she is his forever. Why would I want to live under that kind of subjugation? And where is the love? There is no love at all. You're operating under fear. You're making people being afraid of you. With that said, the phone lines are now open. Phone number here is 248-416-1300. Give us a call if you have any comments, any objections to what we have to say. Mr. Dave Agema will be joining us pretty soon. Now, let us go back to the root cause of the problem again. In chapter 9, verse 11 and verse 12 of the Quran. But if they repent, who is this? The non-believer. And establish worship and pay the poor due. This is such a misinterpretation of the Quran. There is no poor due. This is a penalty tax for you deciding not to convert to Islam. You will live in the land, but you will be subjected, you will be humiliated, and you will pay an additional extra tax, an additional money, more than what the Muslim has to pay. Now let's compare this with America. When America came and they took over of the land of Indians, perhaps, what do? The Indian gets free education. The Indian gets free funds or extra money that is coming their way because this is their land that we took over. That's fair. That's just. Not with Muhammad. Not with Muhammad's God. Not at all. They pay extra money. Well, you came to our land. You took our land. You took down our churches, you demolished our faith, and you subjected us to you. So why do we have to do this? Why do we have to pay an extra penalty? To humiliate us into accepting Islam. And this is not me, this is the Quran. But if they...
By the way,
yeah.
Notice something here. In Surah 9, we find out that slaves are to be treated well, and yet the dhimmi, the one who submits to Islam, is to be humiliated. So there's an additional burden of being a kafir under Islam that not even a slave has.
That's right.
That is, you can be humiliated. And by the way, I think they take this humiliation quite seriously.
They do, so much so, Dr. Bill, that when the Christian or the Jew who stayed a Christian and a Jew had to give up their alms or their heavy penalty, they would crawl to the imam on their knees. Not even, or prostrate down and crawl all the way up to that throne, pay the money, and then come back in the same way on their knees or prostrated flat. So there's the kind of humiliation that happens on a daily basis. Why is that so? Well, it's because the God of Islam said so, and the God of Islam is controlled by Muhammad himself. But let me continue reading in chapter 9, verse 11 and 12. If they repent and establish worship and pay the poor due, then they are your brethren in religion. We detail our revelation for people who have knowledge. And if they break their pledges after their treaty that they have made with you, which is becoming a Muslim, and assail your religion, then fight the heads or kill, murder, take off the heads of those that don't believe. Lo, They are not binding in any oaths, nor are they in order that they may desist, cut off with their heads in that. In chapter 9, verse 29, murder those, not fight, not just kill. This is actual murder. Murder those who do not believe in Allah and in the last day, and do not consider unlawful of what Allah and His Messenger have made unlawful. For we do not adopt a religion of truth from those who were given the scripture. That is strictly a command against Christians. Fight them. No, kill them. Fight them here is a word that means to fight until death. Fight them until they pay the tax willingly, and that's what we were talking about. So Muslims are told to murder unbelievers until they are no more, or they should convert to Islam, or in a permanent stage of subjugation, like we said earlier, under Muslim domination, allowing people of other faiths to live and worship independently of Islamic rule is not an option. And that is the Sharia law as well that is practiced in all of these Islamic countries. But Bill, let's go back to you. Let me ask you something else as well. There is this General Sheikh Malik. Now, he has this book, the Quranic Concept of War. And he argues that terror can succeed only if the kafirs are me and you, any person who doesn't believe in Islam. Terror can only succeed if the kafir's faith is destroyed. Is this true about this general?
He speaks a bitter truth here, and I think that we see this. Eddie, one of the things that breaks my heart is to see how churches and synagogues like to play that they can be the friends of Muslims and that everything will work out all right. Yeah. That is, their faith has been destroyed to where they no longer have true courage. This is something that I see too many times. And I think that this goes to the heart of it. Because if you have true faith and true belief in that you're doing the right thing, then you're willing to fight. But instead we find here in America, or at least in Nashville, Tennessee, is that very few Christians want to fight. They view it as, we need to turn the other cheek. Well, we need to love our enemies. I have nothing against, and when I say love your enemies, by the way, we need to point out here, Islam is the problem. It's not the people, and it's not the Muslims. The doctrine is what is the problem. So we have these situations in which we need to be able to fight, and yet I find here that the favorite things that Christian ministers like to talk about is turning the other cheek, which is, by the way, only an option for a strong person. If you're weak, you don't have an option to turn the other cheek. And so I say that Christians should be courageous and bold, and yet what I find today is that the lack of faith means that they're easily fearful. This fear comes about because of a lack of faith. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, not at all. I believe also that Christians should stand up. I believe this is the root cause of the problem with Islam. It is, just like you said, not the people. I love Muslims. I work with them on a daily basis. I share the gospel with them much of the time. I help them, especially those that are refugees that come into this country. I've been put in a position where I can do that. I don't bash them. I don't talk bad about them. I'm not attacking them personally. But the minute that they tell me that I have to operate under Islamic rule, in a place where I have freedom of speech, in a place where I have freedom of my religion to practice it, then they are trying to subject me and my family and my ways. I escaped from Iraq for that reason, to come here, so that way I can have a religion that I am free, able to accept or not to accept in Christianity. And if I don't accept Christianity or Islam, I will live free, just as you're equal if you are a Muslim or not. But the minute that the Muslim tells me that I have to abide by Sharia law, which is, by the way, starting off in Dearborn and it's taken off pretty well, if I have to live under that law, I want to now escape from some tyrannical or tyrant, which is here, the Quran, Muhammad, and Allah Himself, because of all the commands that He continues to give in the Quran. Look at chapter 8, verse 38 and 39. Say to those who have disbelieved, if they cease from their belief, their past will be forgiven. And fight them, kill them, murder them, until there is no more fitna. Fitna is something nasty, disgusting. Disbelief in polytheism or worshiping others besides Allah, that's a fitna. And the religion that is, the worship will be for Allah alone in the whole world. But if they cease, that is, worshiping any others besides God, then certainly God is the all-seer of what they will do and accept them. That's the only reason for us being somewhat of an equal to a Muslim, because now we are Muslims. But if we are not Muslims, we don't deserve the same treatment, Dr. Bill. Sahih Muslim 133. The Messenger of Allah said, I have been commanded to fight against people till they testify that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad is the Messenger of Allah, and they establish prayer and pay the zakat. To be safe, people must profess faith in Allah, the Shahada, and follow Islamic practices. Now, I don't see that in Christianity at all. I don't see that even with Moses, the one that they always like to go to. Moses did this. Joshua did this. Therefore, it is okay for Muhammad did this. Let's follow the logic here, Dr. Bill. The logic is like this. Moses was chosen by God during a time when there was no law that was established on the land. And there is a miraculous action because he comes down. He had this face that was it was glowing that he had to cover it. And he came down with 2 tablets with the 10 commandments. Why? There was no laws of the land established yet. So God has chosen a people at the time, which were the Jews, the Israelites, or Moses himself and his people, to be the judge and jury of the land, to be the police officers, the CIA agents, the FBI of the land. And from there, whoever doesn't follow the law, God didn't say to go ahead and murder them, as many would say that this happened in the book of Joshua or in Exodus. No, drive them out of the land. And whoever comes against them, then you ought to fight against them, and that is by self-defense. Why do we need that in Muhammad's time? Why did God come to Muhammad and tell him to do these things in Muhammad's time? The law of the land was already established. We have the 10 commandments, and now you want to come up with your own theories and with your own commands that are supposed to be from God, and you say, murder those who don't believe. God didn't say that in the Old Testament. He didn't say that in the New Testament. And Dr. Bill, you pushed on something very good here, which is turn the other cheek. Turning the other cheek doesn't mean that you let the sword come to your heart and kill you. Turning the other cheek is only in case of a fight or an argument or something of that nature, something that you are able to survive. That is turning the other cheek. But when Muslims want to subjugate, or Islam wants to subjugate the whole world, and if you don't believe, then it's off with your head, as the previous verses that I mentioned, then we ought not to stand for that. We have to go against it as much as possible. And you're right, Christians don't do that because they take verses out of context, and most of the time they are fearful and not bold enough. And I'm a Christian. These are my people that I'm talking about. But I'm saying something that's the truth that you've honed in on and you've touched. Anything else you want to say about that, Dr. Bill?
I would like to go back to something you said much earlier. That is, when you say you talk to Muslims, I know many people who are afraid to talk to Muslims.
Yeah.
You may have experienced this yourself. But I found that if you want to discuss Islam with a Muslim, in general, they're happy to do that. Not jumping up in their case and saying, oh, you're bad this way, but just entering into a discussion about it. And I find that they're very amenable to this, and that if you're clever and ask questions, you can put them in points to where they contradict themselves and create a problem. But I encourage people to discuss Islam with Muslims, or at least I've done it a lot and find that it's interesting to do, shall we say.
All right. Okay, so with that said, we have Mr. David Agema is on the line with us. Mr. David Agema, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, well, it's great to be on the phone with you as well. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I've been on the program before. By the way, I'm getting feedback here into my phone, but basically what I was, I'm getting feedback.
We'll fix that.
Okay. So basically what I was a former military officer, And I was also a 3-term state representative, and I was the Republican National Committeeman for the state of Michigan. And I got involved with Islam because of my relationship of Kamal Salim and General Boykin. And I was invited to go to Turkey during the time when I was in the legislature. Still getting that feedback.
Okay. Well, it's great to have you on the show. We've had you on the show before, as you mentioned. We love to have you because your information is very well, and I know that you are heavily involved in politics, and that's why one of the reasons we have you on the show is because of that. We appreciate you being here. Now, as I was talking with Dr. Bill, we were mentioning some of the root causes of the problems. The root cause of the Islamic problem is not just political or tyranny. We see that the root cause of the problem is the Quran itself and its prophet, the Prophet Muhammad. Now, I've mentioned some of these verses before. I will come to you and ask you a question in just 1 minute, Mr. David Agema. The Quran says these following verses. Slay the unbelievers wherever you find them in chapter 2, verse 191. Murder them until there is no more dissent in religion except for that of Allah in chapter 2, verse 193. Look at what it says about us, about you and me and whoever's hearing this that is not a Muslim. The vilest of animals in Allah's sight are those who disbelieve. I guess Muhammad himself was the vilest of animals because he didn't believe in Allah in chapter 8, verse 55. He wasn't a prophet, so-called prophet, till he was 40 years of age. Let not the believers take for friends or helpers the unbelievers, as mentioned earlier in chapter 3, verse 28. I will instill terror into the hearts of the believers and be off with their necks, smite their necks and their fingertips. I don't know why about their fingertips in chapter 8, verse 12. Chapter 9, verse 29 or chapter 9, verse 28, the unbelievers are unclean. We are a stench. We are dhimmi. We are nijus, which is something bad. And we are kafir. We are compared to pigs as well. So we are all these things according to Allah and His Prophet. And if Allah and His Prophet said this, then this is what the Muslim will think about us as well once they read these passages. Now, this is a bad religion. If I could call it a religion, if I could call it anything, it would be a cult. It wouldn't be a religion. And I'm calling it these things because I see cult-like behavior that is available for us in the Quran and in the cults available today. Now, my question to you, Dave, why do you believe that this is the biggest political failure of our government? Because here we have Islam and political Islam, as it's called, but the two go hand in hand, as discussed with Dr. Bill earlier.
No question. The whole point is it's the colonization of America by Islam, and it's not recognized by our politicians. Boy, if you can stop that feedback, I'd love it.
We're going to definitely try, yes.
Illegal immigration has allowed terrorists into our country, and according to General Boykin and every other state of the union, ISIS is there. So the biggest problem we have is, you mentioned it, Islam is a quasi-religion. It's really 10 to 15% religion. It's really about Muhammad, what he did and said. And the Quran and the Sunnah primarily deals with what do you do with a kafir, an infidel, a non-believer. So its goal is world domination and Sharia, the law. So what will have to happen in the United States is, and Trump is correct, the borders must be sealed. Illegals, because ISIS uses illegal immigration to come into the country. They can get no safe harbor. There should be no sanctuary cities or counties or states. And politicians that encourage this need jail time because they're aiding and abetting the enemy. So what's the solution? Seal the border. No jobs for illegals via E-Verify. No driver's license for illegals because that gives them mobility, banking privileges like the Muslims do, boating, flying on my airplanes. I used to be a pilot. That's how they got on airplanes. And no education for them. So another thing that could happen, I think, that hasn't happened yet in many states is the passing of the bill called ALEC, American Law for American Courts. And basically that says is you cannot use a foreign law and a court of law if it causes someone to lose their constitutional rights. Well, it's happened already in Michigan that people have lost their constitutional rights. So if I could just back up here for a moment, Erdogan said, mosques are our barracks. The believers, i.e. Muslim believers, are our army. Others have said every mosque in America is a parliamentary command post for a hostile political movement whose goal is to overthrow America. So our government, in my opinion, is consumed on the course of action in regards to Iran and Syria and all those things, but fails to see the war going on within America via the Islamic State and Marxism. They're going hand in hand. They're operating inside the U.S. using exactly what they said they were going to do. They immigrate, they multiply in numbers, they get involved with schools, they teach the 5 pillars of Islam, they redact anything negative in our school books about Islam. They're getting involved in both local, state, and federal government, and they're taking over from within. So U.S. leaders must understand that we're in a war from within against Islam and Marxism that, like I said, are working hand in hand to defeat and destroy America. We must not capitulate, in my opinion. We must not surrender. And both of those want our President Trump impeached. The impeachment should be a red flag to every red American patriot that all is not well in America. The Islamic State will now advance, in my opinion, to the next level of their Islamophobia campaign and demand more and more concessions from our government to advance their agenda. And this will mean more domestic violence from jihadis in the near future. So what's the biggest failure? The biggest failure is our government needs to recognize who the enemy is and what they should do about it. And presently they are doing very little about it.
Amen. Yes, and we do have the enemy all outlined in a book called the Quran, because the Quran is out to get every single kafir, as you have mentioned, out of the picture, so that we nobody left on this earth except for Muslims. So if we were just study the enemy's manual, which is the Quran, then we would understand exactly how the enemy thinks, how the enemy operates. Look at the hadiths, look at the way that Muhammad and all of the caliphates operated after he was gone. They operate in this shrewd, militant mindset that tells people to wait, we will have our day. 9/11, that wasn't just a date that they picked out of a hat. No, this was something that happened in the, I believe, either 13th or 14th century, where the Muslims were defeated heavily by the Christians, and they picked the date. And guess what? It was 400 or 500 years later that this took place. Now, with that said, Dr. Bill, let us go back to you. What I've heard you mention something about this general in the Pakistani army. And this general has this book. And in this book, every militant aspect, militant personnel is required to read it. Mention some of those things in that book. And what is that book?
Well, the book, I have it here on my desk. Oh, by the way, before I talk about the book, which I will just in a moment, the gentleman brought up something when he was a state representative, that he got to go to Turkey. This is a form of, I want to mention that this is a form of jihad. Too many people think that jihad is just violence and blood, but there are many kinds of jihad, including the jihad of money. And so this has happened in Tennessee, in the state legislature. The Turks have brought people who are elected officials to Turkey, and there they give them a beautiful view of what Islam really is, and they bring Christian ministers to Turkey. And when they come back, they say things like this: I have seen the true Islam, and it is a beautiful thing. We need more and more Muslims. Exactly. This is from a Presbyterian minister who has had his trip paid to go to Turkey, and he believed every lie they told him. He does not believe the Quran. He believes those Muslims who took him over there and treated him nice and showed him a few Christians that are still left. By the way, I must make mention of something. You'd be astounded how many Christians do not know that Turkey used to be a Christian nation.
Yeah.
But that is over. Anyway, back to the book. It's called The Quranic Concept of War by Brigadier General S.K. Malik. And this is a book that every flag rank officer, that is every general in the Pakistani army, has to read. The Quranic Concept of War. So much for the religion of peace. because he goes through and gives the different verses, which we've been talking about, and shows what implies this in the form of war. So this is the kind of book that will not be read by the generals in Afghanistan. But here we have our generals who refuse to know what Islam is, but the Pakistani military knows that their best training manual is the Quran and the Hadith of Muhammad. So this is the book, and I only wish that our military here could read it, because they would learn the true nature of Islam, which is a smile if that works, and a stab in the back if that works better.
Yeah, and not only that, if we were to study that book, doing my research on that book, 70 to 80% of it is a direct quote from the Quran, what Muhammad had done, and what the caliphates had done as well. This is the military mindset of Muhammad and his caliphates. So if we know about the historical Islam, specifically 6th, 7th century Islam, we will understand exactly how they operate, what they're doing, why they're doing it. Now, back to you, Dave. Can you give us examples of the upstick of violence and political jihad, as Dr. Bill has just mentioned?
Well, first of all, I got to say what the doctor just said is very interesting, because when I was invited to go to Turkey, I had a briefing with Kamal Salim and General Boykin, and they told me they were going to be asking for just basically more green cards. They just wanted to be friendly. They wanted a whole bunch of different things, but they really wanted just to get into this country and take it over. So as soon as I came back, I put that American Law for American Courts bill in. And that's what they really didn't appreciate very much. And that was done by the Gulen Society. And he's exactly correct. They do that for congressmen and people throughout the United States, and they come back with a warped view of what Islam really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And
so what I gets back to the uptick, let's go back just a couple of weeks. By the way, I'm still getting the feedback. If we go back just a couple of weeks, you can see that Hamas uses CARE in this January 6th to condemn actions by the U.S. Customs border because they detained Iranians at the border in the wake of the Iranian tensions. So CARE equals terrorist equals Iranian terrorists, terrorists supporting terrorists. Hamas and CARE side with Iran and cry Islamophobia. On January 7, Congressman Omar sides with Soleimani and calls Trump killing him an act of war. Hello, Omar. He's been at war with us for years and has killed over 600 Americans. She is a Sharia adherent Muslim, and she swore on the book, the Quran, that calls for our elimination. She shouldn't be in Congress. Her allegiance is elsewhere. Also on January 7, for example, a 21-year-old Muslim rapes a 92-year-old infidel woman in New York. Also, the New York Times on January 7 publishes an article concerning Soleimani based on the comments of Iranian students who support terrorism. What kind of stupid is this? Bad reporting. Also on that same date, Stephen Kirby published the results of a survey of the Muslim politicians in the United States. And guess what? 93% do not support the Constitution. You got the fox in the hen house. January 8th, Dateline, North Dakota. 33-year-old Muslim named, if I misspell or mispronounce this, I'm sorry, Mossad assaulted his stepdaughter by smashing her head against the wall and hitting her with a broomstick for not wearing the hijab. Once again, Alex should have been passed. That should not be allowed, but he said it was his religion. By the way, the girl would change clothes when she went to school. So you see that they're demanding America conform to their Sharia law. Also, 4 Democrat members of Congress, including Bernie Sanders, Warren, going on a conference call with Iranian regime propaganda front called NIAC, National Iranian American Council. That call was hosted by George Soros-funded Marxist group, MoveOn.org. So political Islam is at work in America. Also, on that same date, or January 8th, MSNBC, Chris Matthews likened Soleimani to Elvis Presley and Princess Diana and called him a beloved hero, which is absolutely garbage. Now, if you look even a little further, on January 9, and I'm going to probably ruin the pronunciation, Asia Saladikli, a Muslim female, was sentenced to 15 years in New York for building a bomb for a terrorist attack. Also on that date, Osama Hanukkah King, I don't know how to pronounce that, sentenced to 25 years in Illinois for 14 crimes against Christians, stating that he hated Christians. On January 11, 12 Saudi military personnel were expelled from the United States because of another Saudi killing of 3 people and wounding several others on the naval base. Also, the same date, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, is circulating a petition in support of Fethullah Gulen, an enemy of the United States. So, in short, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamophobia campaign is intensifying, and so also will violence. No Muslim leader working with our senior U.S. government officials are friendly to the cause of liberty or American principles. So what do we have? Leaders desperate to fund a road forward that does not include waging war against a clear and present danger like Iran, such as Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Qatar and others, will continue to lean and appease and basically appease the jihadis to help them find solutions without identifying the enemy. That's the problem. It's Islam itself. And this is exactly how Islam and the counter state intends to win the war. So, I mean, you can go on and on. Even lately, ISIS is now headed up by the Islamic scholar. His name is Amir Mohammed Abdul Rahman al-Mali al-Saudi. He has a degree in Sharia law from the University of Mosul. He was one that spearheaded the genocide of the Yazidis. He is now head of ISIS. The United Kingdom Muslim rape gangs quoted the Quran as they raped their victims as justification. Israel thwarted 560 terrorist attacks in 2019. I think we could learn from them. In France, 7 Muslims were arrested for plotting jihad massacre. So far in France, 250 people have been killed. In Sweden, women are quitting their jobs in malls due to harassment by Muslims. Sweden is now increasingly associated with a rising number of Islamic State recruits, bombings, and hand grenades. So what did I just list? I just put a list out of about a week and a half of things that are occurring in the United States and foreign countries. So you can see it's alive and well. They're not going to quit. They're going to keep going as long as they believe that Muhammad was a prophet and Allah is the God and Muhammad's the last prophet. They're going to try to do and say exactly what Muhammad says and does. And what did he do? He raped, he killed, he pillaged. And the goal, once again, is nothing more than a one world government with the imam in charge, the caliphate, if you will, and everybody has to be Muslim. Then they say there will be peace. But until that occurs, there will always be war, and we have 1,400 years of history proving that.
Yeah, and even then, all this is being done to call upon one person that comes towards the end, and this person is called the Mahdi, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Dave, you hit on a lot of things here that are happening, and you mentioned the root cause of the problem, as we've been mentioning here on the show, and it is the Quran, the actions of Muhammad, and the Imams right after him. And even with what was done with Soleimani, Iran wants to be in an uproar about this. They want to get mad about this. This is a person that's been responsible for 600 plus American citizens, American lives. And with all that he has wounded, with the stuff that he has taught as far as technology, how to build bombs, how to do all these things, how to neutralize the enemy, all this, with America being the enemy in mind, we kill this person. And we do it justly. This should have been done a long time ago. And with this done, they want to get mad. They want to get upset. How should we not get mad and upset? We killed one person that is Iranian. That Iranian person is responsible for 600 plus American lives. Where is the justice? We ought to take 600 lives to be equal with the 600 lives that he's taken. We're not calling out for that. We're calling out for peace. President Trump said, if you're going to make a move, something else will happen that is worse. So let us not be worse about this. Let's handle it civilly. And that way, we don't have to go to war, which is the correct answer in my opinion. But with a person that's responsible for as many lives and deaths, and he has a legacy teaching all the stuff that comes right after him, this should have been done a long time ago. And Dave, I thank you for mentioning all of these outrageous, egregious things. But with that comes your next question. What, out of all the things that you just mentioned, What, in your opinion, is the most egregious action of political Islam at work that is in Congress? What are they trying to do in Congress now?
Well, other than the total ignorance of most congressmen and radical Sharia-loving congressmen like Omar and Tlaib, on November 2019, 120 members of Congress issued letters of support to Hamas-linked CARE. They were an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trials. And several of CARE's leaders are actually serving time in jail for funding terrorism. So here we got congressmen supporting the very people that are perpetuating terrorism in the United States. So CARE, Council on American-Islamic Relations, wants Sharia law in the United States. CARE has opposed every effort against terrorists ever. And they're operating in the United States along with about 28 other organizations that were identified in the Holy Land Foundation trials. And who signed that? It was Omar, obviously, Linda Sosar, Warren, Klobuchar, Tlaib, Swalwell, Rep. Lawrence, and Dingell from Michigan, and others. So the enemy's us, because we have an ignorant electorate who get their information from a news media that does not report news but pontificates on the news with a liberal, ignorant bent to it. So, and the people believe it. So in my opinion, when you have 120 people supporting an agency that supports terrorism, we have a severe problem in the United States of America. We are electing wrong people, wrong-thinking people in our offices. And primarily, not all, but primarily they are Democrats. And they are now turned, in my opinion, the Democrat Party has turned to the Communist Party in the United States. And they will do anything to get any illegal or legal person in the United States that will get on welfare, so they'll vote for them to stay in office. So we have a big problem.
Yeah, they have an incentive to vote for somebody that will help them go along with their ideas of Sharia law that you mentioned. Sharia law, by the way, folks, is a code of law delivered directly from the Quran, from Muhammad's teachings. And let me just give you an example. One of them is if you were to steal. I'm from Iraq, and I saw this firsthand. They will take a person who has stolen something, take him in the public, and I saw this when I was 7, 8 years old, and it's from chapter 5, verse 38. Theft is punishable by the amputation of your right hand. This is from the Quran, chapter 5, verse 38. As for the thief, the male and the female amputate their hands in recompense for what they committed, as a deterrent punishment from Allah, and Allah is exalted and most high and wise. So if Allah is the exalted, most high and wise, if Dave or Dr. Bill just stole something, it's off with their hand. Well, what if Dave or Dr. Bill was mistaken? What if this was a case of mistaken identity? Can I sew your hand back on? Will it work in the same way? No, it's not going to work. What if somebody accused you, just you, because you're a Christian, or you're an atheist, or you're not a Muslim? They can do that. The Christian or the non-Muslim will not have their day in court because their voice will be silenced because they're not the Muslims' equal. What if I did it because my family was severely starving and nobody could do anything for them? What if that's the reason why? Nobody cares because I am not a Muslim and my hand should be cut off. And now I have no opportunity, no chance for me to make money ever again because I have no hand to make money. How am I going to work with my feet? That's going to be literally impossible or slow things down. So this is one of the things that Dave just hit on. He said this is Sharia law will come along. This is one of the things we have to look forward to, folks, if we allow the Islamic faith to go on. Now, back to Dr. Bill. There is this constant war in the Middle East, as we've seen, as Mr. Dave just mentioned, and it's literally destroying Christianity one by one. How come these U.S. churches that I see, or even the U.S. government, isn't doing so much about it? Where's their outcry?
You break in my heart because this is truly a sore point with me. Let me mention something here before we get to that has happened here in Nashville, Tennessee that illustrates our problem, but it does tie into the churches. And that is we have elected in Nashville to our city council our first Muslim member of the council. She ran at large. She won overwhelmingly. Do you know who elected her? The left, the Democrats, and the Christians and the Jews. Both the Christians and the Jews were so proud that they could show how tolerant they were by voting for a Muslim, because that's what we need, is tolerance. Well, why should we tolerate evil? Why should we tolerate that which is out to harm us? Why should we tolerate something that's been killing our own kind for 1,400 years? And yet we see that in Nashville, Tennessee, we have people who are otherwise good people who are willing to vote for that which is evil because they want to show how tolerant they are. I've had it with tolerance. And by the way, I think of myself as a tolerant man, but I do not tolerate that which harms. And yet we're called upon that to prove our virtue, we should tolerate something which is harmful. This is not true, and it's not what I believe in.
Where is the tolerance from the Islamic side? How come they're not? How come they're not tolerating us and our religion? I was just hearing this political speech that went on in, I believe, in the UK, and it involved a Christian, an atheist, and a Muslim. And this Muslim had the audacity to say to his gullible audience that Muslims and Christians and atheists and Jews have been living together in one land harmoniously without anything wrong. Who are you kidding? I mean, I got so mad, I almost pulled over in the middle of the highway and just I was outraged. Bill, I could not take it. How dare you tell such lies? We look at history. Where's the hadith? There's the hadith that says, when you find a Christian or a Jew walking alongside you, you push them to the nearest side of the street. That is an easy translation. You see, the gullible Westerners don't understand that in the Middle Ages, until this day, that middle narrow part of the street is actually the sewer line. If you go to Iraq today, that is the sewer line where all the sewers from all of the toilets would come down this main little U-shaped place that's in the middle of the road, and that's where it goes all the way down to either the river or somewhere else that is disgusting. That's where you're supposed to push them. We as Westerners here do not understand that the Star of David that is popularized in a lot of the movies was actually an Islamic invention. It wasn't made by the Nazis. It was popularized by the Nazis. That Star of David is supposed to make you known to the Muslim as that you're a Jew, and you push them to that sewer line and leave them there because they're dirty. The belt that us men wear today in the West, that is a significance or a telltale sign of a Christian. The bells, the zunar, those are our Christian things, and Muhammad was against them, and Allah was against them. And we ought to wear it in the 6th, 7th century, the belt, to let them know that we are Christians, so that we may be subjugated and pushed to the narrowest part of the road, which is the sewer line. Dave, you had mentioned again the Sharia law. I mentioned that if you're stealing, it's off with your hand if you go with the Sharia law. Or how about if you criticize or deny any part of the Quran? That is punishable by death. And let me read to you this out of Sahih Muslim, volume 3, numbers 4422 and 4424. Or you can also see this from Sahih al-Bukhari, volume 4, number 2934. Uqba, there's this person named Uqba, he harassed and he mocked Muhammad in Mecca. This was when he was the minority. And he wrote derogatory verses about him. Look at verses in the Quran, chapter 83, verse 13. He was captured later on when Muhammad had the upper hand and he was a majority. He was captured during the battle of Badr in 624. And Muhammad ordered him to be executed. And Uqba said, okay, I accept this. I'm about to be executed. But please, who will look after my children, O Muhammad? Please, I'm looking out after my children. I'm sorry that I did this. I didn't know that one day you would be this powerful. How about my children? Uqba cried out with anguish. You know how he responded, this peaceful prophet, the last prophet of God. He said, hell will look after your children. This is how the prophet reported this coldly. Then a sword from one of his followers cut through Uqba's neck. And this is how you ought to deal under Sharia law with a person that any person that criticizes Islam, the Prophet, or Allah. I don't even have any room for criticism. Therefore, how do I know if Islam is the truth or not? I wouldn't know. So if you want Islam to continue, that's one other thing that you would look forward to as being part of the Sharia law. Now, we want to remind the audience that it's 6 o'clock. Our phone lines are open. Phone number to reach us here is 248 416 1300. I want us to please share this with as many people as we can on Facebook, on YouTube. And this is also being shot live over the Middle East satellites that we have going now. Back to you, Mr. Dave. In your opinion, this has gone too far. In my opinion, in Dr. Bill's opinion, it has gone too far, but it continues to move forward. How in the world do we stop this political Islam or this Islamic ideology?
Well, I think the first thing you have to recognize that Islam is an enemy of America. And if I can just pigtail on what you just said, I don't like to use the word pig because I know I don't like that, but that's what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
Sharia says there's no infidel can own a gun. That's against our Constitution. They can have multiple wives. That's against our laws. They can't question the Quran, even though the Quran had changed many times. They confiscated many, rechanged some of the words, put punctuations in, and so forth. There's no equality of persons in the Quran. You have Muslims first, and infidels are way down the list, somewhere around dogs and pigs. There's no tolerance for any other religion. And by the way, you mentioned CARE. CARE put me on one of their hit lists. So after exposing some of the stuff that went on, I think for a while I was number 16 on their quasi-hit list. See, and another thing that's really false that the Muslims have to understand, you as a Muslim cannot pick and choose what you choose to believe in the Quran. You cannot change it. You cannot speak against it. So it is what it is. So some people say, well, I'm a moderate Muslim. Well, then you're basically not a Muslim, and you're due to be killed because you don't believe what Muhammad did and what he said. So a Muslim cannot pick and choose what he wants to say. It's usually using taqiyya. That means they can lie, cheat, and steal if the truth is the cause of Islam. So how do we stop political Islam? One, we recognize Islam is an enemy of America as well as Israel. We have to stop illegal immigration. ISIS said they were going to use it. They did. We have to stop large numbers of Muslims from radical countries that come into our country that don't want to assimilate. And we need to allow more Christians and Jews from those countries that are the real persecuted ones to immigrate. And I've said before, you got to pass American law for American courts, and you got to stop them from getting driver's license and so forth. Don't allow congressmen to swear in on the Quran that calls for our destruction. The American public must be better informed concerning Islam in our schools, but they're not. Presently, your kids in public schools, your school books are redacted by Muslims of anything negative about 1,400 years of rape, murder, and killing. Mosques that radicalize the United States must be shut down. We got to stop Muslims with multiple wives from getting welfare. And most of their wives they call them their cousins or relatives and so forth, are basically just on welfare, which is not good. It costs us a lot of money. But what people need to know is that Islam is a totalitarian form of government. It's more government than it is a religion. It's a political system of absolute power where the state has no limit to its authority. It regulates every aspect of public and private life. It's exactly what America's forefathers came against. I think it was Jefferson and Adams when they went to meet the imam that was taking our ships when we first became a nation. They came back to this country and they made 200 Qurans and said, this is the barbaric religion we're dealing with. And it was Jefferson that said we need a Navy and a Marine Corps because we're not going to pay 1/3 or 1/4 of our GDP to Muslims that were stealing our ships.
Yeah.
So false assumption is that Islam is a religion based on the Quran. It's more about Muhammad, what he said and did. There's over 90 verses in the Quran that say Muhammad is the perfect example. So you got to live like him. So what did he do? He killed, he raped, he pillaged, he married a 6-year-old girl. He had sex with her at age 9. The words devoted to Muhammad are 6 times the size of the Quran. Let that sink in. So the trilogy, the Quran, the Hadith, the Sirah, is mostly not about Muslims, but how to abuse and how to deal with kafirs, infidels, people like me. So it's not so much about religion, but a complete political civilization built on world domination.
Amen.
So,
And
in my
and
opinion, it's a philosophy, it's a ritual, it's about morals, it's about taxes, it's about their banking, it's about marriage, it's about sex, it's about divorce, it's about apostasy, how to deal with kafirs. That's what Sharia law is, and that's what Islam is. It is not compatible to America's culture nor our Constitution. The two cannot coexist.
And we know this. That's the problem. We know this. I mean, imagine, Dr. Bill and Mr. Dave, you know all these things about Islam. It's like I know that this person is an enemy of mine. He's a thief. He's a robber. He's out to kill me. He means to do me harm. And if he's my friend, he's faking it. Yet I invite him into my house. I don't want you in my house. I don't want you anywhere near me. That's why I'm going to build a wall to block you. Now, with that said, we have a caller. Pam, you're on the line. Who is your question to, comment, or objection?
Hi, Eddie. How are you guys doing? Hi, Dr. Warner. And I'm sorry I've got a gentleman was a politician. I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was keeping up with the bill for a long time on designating the Muslim Brotherhood a foreign terrorist organization, and that bill is going nowhere.
That's right.
And we have, right where I went to college, I'm in South Carolina, I went to Winthrop College, not far away is along the camps, I'm sure you know about the Muslims of America, Islamville Way. And they're all the way from New York to Atlanta. Mm-hmm. What can we do about this? I mean, our governor took money from Qatar for his reelection, so, I mean, I don't really think he's worried about it. So, you know, these things, people have seen them, they have taped them with doing guerrilla warfare. They're out of Pakistan, and all of them, I believe, are out of Pakistan, from what Ryan Morrow of the Clarion says. But anyway, they also have high-powered shotguns with night vision goggles. They've been caught on tape shooting at night. It's a big 30-acre compound. They won't let anybody in.
Yeah, they won't. So, Dr. Bill, did you hear the question? What do we do about these people that is happening?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different tact here. I don't know what to do about the camps, but one of the things I think we need to see is that if the churches would do their job, but the churches are so compromised, we now have to say if Christians would do their job of learning what the history of the persecution of the churches is, it is a tragedy. We're talking here about immigration. What is a tragedy is that the Christians are not here instead of the Muslims. But I lay this at the feet of the churches, who are very silent on the issue of the persecution of the Christians in the Middle East. They don't want to talk about it. They want to deal with it. Let me give you an example. There's a university here in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a Christian university. You cannot learn anything at this university about the suffering of Christians over 1,400 years. So we need to see that there are many of us in America who break down into smaller segments that need to oppose Islam. Politicians need to do it. Churches need to do it, and also the synagogues as well. But we need to have, and our media needs to do it, our schools need to do it. But all of these things which are supposed to support our civilization have rolled over and playing dead because they don't want to be called bigots. I have been called a racist, a hater, a bigot, and an Islamophobe. At first it's insulting, but now that I don't pay any attention to it. And yet what we're seeing is that you can bully the most powerful people in the world by just calling them dirty names. And by the way, I've been a longtime member of the Southern Poverty Law Center's hater campaign. So we need to see that there are law enforcement, military, these are all organizations which should be defending us, and yet they have compromised themselves. And I think that we need to start looking and seeing how those have compromised themselves need to be talked to in such a way that they can start doing something that is positive. How can any Christian tolerate the suffering of Christians in Africa? How can they tolerate the suffering of Christians in Iraq? As a matter of fact, I find that most Christians don't even know that Iraq, Syria, half of Persia, Turkey, Egypt, and North Africa even used to be Christian.
Yeah.
The point I'm making here is that Christian ignorance is so profound that it is a sin.
Yeah. Not only that, we're just in our comfort zone, Dr. Bill. We're in our comfort zone. We don't want to do anything that causes us to get up out of our lazy butts in our lazy, cozy chairs. That's the problem. And then they won't do anything, because I've seen this in history. They won't do anything unless the sword is coming to smite them at their necks, and then they're calling out, who's going to help? Well, there is no one left to help you, because you didn't help them. You allowed them to continue. So I guess, and I'm trying to say is, yes, it is our fault for not doing anything about it. And as the quote goes, in order for evil to continue, good men do nothing about it. And I'm paraphrasing that quote. Now we have another caller on the line. His name is Ram. Ram, who is your comment, question, or objection to?
No objections. I agree with everything. I just wanted to give a comment, provide a comment. I was raised in a Muslim country, and so I had to attend Islamic education twice a week. And I'm a Christian today. I found the
Praise
Lord
the
years
Lord for
ago.
that. Amen.
One of the things they taught us was when you're in a majority in a country, lie, 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 lie. Minority until you become majority. As a minority, they taught us to act or behave as a sheep. Say whatever you need to say, because that's the jihad of the tongue. You're fighting jihad, it's just not with the sword. And once you get over to a number that's majority, you take over. I ran into a gentleman years ago in Columbus, Ohio. This was probably the late 80s. And this gentleman back then was, he stood out because he was dressed in Islamic garb. And I started a conversation with him. I was telling him, I became a Christian, I was a Muslim, and all this other stuff. And he showed me a plan, and he told me, he said, we are going to have a Muslim president in the White House within 25 years. And he said, our plan is to take over America. And he showed me all this stuff was written out. And unfortunately, he didn't have a copy to share with me. But they did accomplish the number one part of that plan, which is Barack Hussein Obama becoming president. We are in grave danger in this country. We need to get rid of Islam. It's not a religion. Yeah. It's a political system. It's communism and Nazism dressed in religious terms. And we are in danger, if they do succeed, of becoming the next Iran or the next whatever and going down the tubes. We need to get rid of it. We shouldn't treat Islam as a religion. It's just as bad as communism or whatever else political force that wants to overthrow America. They don't have anything good about America that they want to do. They just want to take over.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Ram, for your call.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. So even Nazis, the Nazis themselves loved the Muslims for taking out a lot of the Jews. They loved their shrewdness for taking out so many of the Jews and the atheists and the non-believers. I mean, this is not a religion by any means. For whoever calls it a religion, I want you to prove it based on the previous prophets that had lived, the previous ways that God had dealt with these people that were infidels in the Old Testament. In the New, there was nothing but love. I mean, let's just imagine this. If you guys can remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, here's God who was talking to Abraham about Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was filled with gays and lesbians, and God was saying that this is an abomination for all mankind. Not only that, there was rape, there was there's much to say about that story. But God is talking with Abraham. Abraham is negotiating with the God of the universe who had made him. And he's saying, God, these two nations that have more than 100,000 people, for the sake of 50 people, will you save them? God says, yes. Then Abraham says, for the sake of 40 people, God says, I will save for the sake of 40 people. Now, that's not fair. That's not fair, because for the sake of 40 people, 100,000 people plus will be saved. And he says, how about 30? How about 20? How about 10? And God says, this is God's love. God says, okay, for the sake of 10 righteous people, I will save 100,000 plus sinners, 100,000 plus infidels for their 10 people's lives, for the 10 righteous. There weren't even 10 righteous. There were only 4. Lot, his wife, and the 2 daughters. There were only 4 And even the wife wasn't righteous because she was turning back, wanting to go back to that lifestyle. So there was only technically 3. This is the love of God and how he deals with infidels in the Old Testament. Where is this hate that is coming against the infidels in the Quran? It is definitely not of God. It is from Muhammad himself, because he was rejected by a lot of these so-called infidels. And not only that, compare any cult leader throughout history to Muhammad. They wanted 3 major things. 1 was power, 2 was fame, 3rd was money, and maybe you can add on a 4th was sex. This Muhammad shared in all of the cult-like behaviors of the cult leaders throughout history. Why is that happening? Because this is a cult and people are buying it disguised as a religion. We don't see it that way at all because we are looking from the outside in. Now, for the final comment, I will give it to Mr. Dave, and then we'll go to Dr. Bill. And Lord willing, we will end the show. What do you have to say for your final comment, Mr. Dave?
Well, I'd like to bring it back to some more contemporary things that are happening. For example, in Iran, the people are angry at their own government. They shot down a passenger jet, and then they lied about it for several days, and they were caught in the lie. Regime change is being talked about by the protesters. So Iranian's political system is really vulnerable at this present time. Why? Because 1, economic collapse by Trump's sanctions. Item 2, there's 90% drop in their oil revenues. And item 3, there's a rise in unemployment, a huge rise. And item 4, there's 42% inflation rate in 2019. Yet, Iran continued spending huge sums of money for military aid to Assad in Syria, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Hamas in the Gaza. All the while, the people were suffering. So the targeting, killing of Soleimani scared, in my opinion, the leaders, the political leaders in Iran. Iran thinks the issue of the Palestinians is most important. Just recently, that's not true. The Saudis don't believe it. UAE doesn't believe it. Egypt doesn't believe it either. Thousands of Iranian protesters refused to trample on the U.S. flag. That's significant. Instead, they called for regime change. Many shouted, "Death to Palestine." Think about that one. And by the way, Palestine was started after the Jews were kicked out of their own country by the Romans. Trump's action, in my opinion, by crushing economic sanctions, his diplomatic isolation, and his clear threat to kill Iranian leaders who kill Americans, and that's one thing they understand. They understand power, and those who are willing to use it. They fear Trump. Trump could, if he wanted to, send special aid and weapons to the Kurds and the Arabs and the Syrians and Iran, and they're frightened of that as well. So in my opinion, what's happening right now in Iran could be a real game changer, and I think Trump's done really a great job in 3 years to stifle the Islamic political goals worldwide and even in our own country. So just keep looking, folks, because some of the things that are going on in the country that our news media reports aren't actually accurate, and there's a lot of turmoil going on in Iran. The one I fear more is Turkey, because they have an economy that can do a lot of things, and Erdogan is a hardcore Islamist, Sharia-loving man. So with that being said, everything you just said before this is exactly true. Islam is not so much a religion; it's just a political way of life, and it's an attempt to try to take world domination.
Amen. Well, thank you for joining us, Mr. David. We are looking forward for you to being with us again in the near future, in the near shows. God bless you for all that you do, and God bless you for your work. With that said, let us go to Dr. Bill Warner for a final comment as well.
I would like to add one thing to what Dave just said, and that is we do have a chance in Iran to have a regime change, but we need to be supporting those who want to resist Islam. This gets off into special forces war. We need to have our own people in power there who can help those who need help in terms of overthrowing the government. And let me say, I've mentioned the word power. It's funny, Muslims do not respect those who are weak. The only one thing that they respect in a kafir is strength, overwhelming strength. And yet we're afraid to show overwhelming strength because that wouldn't be tolerant. So that's one of the things we need to do. We have a great advantage here. And by the way, for the listeners, we need to understand that Iran was formed around the culture of Persia, and the Persians are not Arabs. They're a very different kind of people and actually a beautiful civilization, a high civilization, has been conquered by Islam and degenerated. So we should work in every way possible across broad fronts to support those in the Persians in Iran who are sick and tired of Islam. By the way, I'm told by people who know the best, that is, the youth really despise Islam because they've suffered from it for far too long. They have no illusions about the beauty and grandiosity of Islam. They despise the mullahs because the mullahs have oppressed, and they're corrupt. So this is well known inside of Iran.
And majority of the refugees that come here to the United States asking for help, that is, they come here legally. They're asking for help. We see them sometimes on television shows, on news networks. Why are they suffering? They themselves are Muslims. They're suffering under the hands of Islam, of Islamic terrorists as well. Then we go take a look at the Islamic terrorist actions. They match the exact actions of Muhammad, of the caliphates, of Abu Bakr, of Ali, of all of the Shiites, of all of the Sunnis. That's where they're getting it from, and they're so sick of it themselves. That's why they're escaping and they're coming to this country. Now, it could be that they're operating under the khil, where they're lying, and they just want to come here and proselytize and make many more Muslims. That's fine if you want to do that, as long as you're doing it with speech, as long as you're doing it with talk, not by violence and not by calling me an Islamophobe if I decide to speak out against Islam. Why are you labeling me something that doesn't even exist? I should label you a Christianophobe or something of that nature because you don't like Christians. But again, this is not against a Muslim, a personal Muslim that I have in mind. This is against Islam, this is against Quran, this is against the ideology of all of Islam. So with that said, there is the Sharia law that, again, that we have to look forward to if Islam continues. And the Sharia law is horrible. You do not want to live under it, especially if you're a woman. Your testimony isn't going to be any well in court. It needs 2 or more witnesses. A woman should be circumcised at a younger age. A woman cannot drive a car. A woman cannot have 4 husbands as the man can have 4 wives. Homosexuality's punishment is pretty funny for the men and for the women. You get to get hit with slippers. Christians and Jews will be subjugated under Sharia law. I mean, there's just nothing to help humanity out. It's only to help Muslims out if the Muslims are the majority. So again, thank you, Dr. Bill, for joining us. We will soon see you on a future show, Lord willing. Thank you for taking the time to see us. With that said, we will end the show. Thank you all for watching. We ask of you to share, comment, and go on YouTube, go on Facebook, spread the word, because it's hard for us sometimes to get a lot of attraction because we're talking about some things that will get flagged right away because it is going against a personal belief, so-called religion. We don't seem to think it is, and this is our freedom of speech that we're practicing. Thank you for joining us. Until next week, God bless.